The alarm on Caleb Merritt's phone went off at 4:45 in the morning, same as every other day. The screen cracked at the corner, the glass held together by a strip of clear tape he'd applied 3 months ago and never replaced. He silenced it with his thumb before it could ring twice. An old habit born from years of sharing thin walls with people he didn't want to wake. The trailer was cold. October in the Texas Hill Country didn't play games. The temperature had dropped into the upper 30s overnight, and the single-pane windows did almost nothing to hold the warmth inside. Caleb sat up on the edge of his cot, rubbing his face with both hands, and let his eyes adjust to the darkness. The small space heater in the corner glowed orange, humming quietly. Across the room, behind a curtain he'd hung using a tension rod and 2 bent nails, his daughter Lily slept in her narrow bed, tucked under 2 quilts and the old fleece blanket he'd bought at a gas station in Amarillo 4 years ago. He sat still for a moment, listening to her breathe. Then he stood, pulled on his thermal undershirt, his flannel, his worn Carhartt jacket, his jeans stiff from the previous day's dried mud, and his boots, brown leather, resoled twice. The left one with a small hole near the toe he'd been meaning to patch for 2 weeks. He moved without turning on the overhead light. He knew the space by feel. 4 steps to the bathroom, 2 steps back, reach left for the jacket hook, find the door handle without looking. Outside, the air hit him full in the face. The sky over Drover's Creek Ranch was enormous. That was the one thing about this part of Texas that never stopped affecting him, no matter how many mornings he'd stood in it. A black vault dusted with stars, the Milky Way still visible in the hour before dawn. The kind of sky that made a man feel small and strangely grateful at the same time. His breath came out in visible clouds. The gravel crunched under his boots as he made his way toward the main barn. Hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, collar turned up against the wind that moved steadily from the northwest. Drover's Creek Ranch covered just over 4,000 acres in Kendall County, about 30 miles north of San Antonio. Thomas Whitfield had inherited the core property from his father and expanded it aggressively over 2 decades, acquiring adjacent parcels whenever they came available, until the ranch had become one of the larger private cattle operations in the region. It ran approximately 800 head of Angus Hereford crossbreeds, maintained a small herd of quarter horses, and in recent years had added a modest but profitable agritourism component. Weekend visitors who paid to ride horses, watch cattle work, and eat barbecue on a cedar deck overlooking the valley. Caleb had nothing to do with the tourism side. His job was the cattle. He'd been hired 2 years ago by the ranch foreman Dale Hutchins, a lean and weathered man in his mid-50s who communicated almost entirely in single syllables and trusted action over words. The interview had lasted 6 minutes. Dale had looked at Caleb's hands, asked him 2 questions about cattle health, and told him to show up Monday at 5. No written contract, no benefits discussion, just a handshake and a daily rate that was fair, but not generous. Caleb had taken the job without negotiating. He needed it too badly to negotiate. The main barn was already lit when he arrived. Dale was always there before him, a point of quiet pride the foreman never mentioned but always maintained. 2 other hands, brothers named Marco and Jesse Vega, were filling water troughs at the far end. Caleb nodded at them and they nodded back. That was generally the extent of the morning conversation. He pulled the feeding schedule from the clip on the post at the barn entrance and ran his eyes down it. Dale had added a handwritten note at the bottom. Check south pasture fence line after feeding. Storm last night may have knocked sections down near the creek. Caleb folded the paper and tucked it in his jacket pocket. He worked through the feeding routine methodically. Hay distribution, grain supplements for the animals flagged for weight monitoring, fresh water checks, a visual pass through each pen to spot anything that looked off, limping, lethargy, discharge, unusual behavior. He'd learned to read cattle the way some people read faces, picking up signals that were subtle enough to miss if you weren't paying close attention. It was a skill built from years of work on different operations across 3 states, and it had made him useful enough that Dale rarely questioned his judgments on animal health. By 7:15 he was done with the barn. He loaded a repair kit into the back of the old F250 work truck, wire cutters, fence pliers, a roll of barbed wire, wooden stakes, and drove the rutted dirt road south toward the creek pasture. The sun was just breaking over the eastern ridge when he arrived, painting the dry grass amber and throwing long shadows across the slope. He parked at the gate, climbed through, and started walking the fence line, scanning the wire and the posts for damage. He found it about a quarter-mile in, a section where a fallen cedar branch had come down on the wire, pulling 2 posts clean out of the ground and leaving a gap of nearly 8 feet. The ground around it was churned from cattle moving through. He made note of it and kept walking, checking the line all the way to where it met the creek bank. That's where he heard it. A sound he almost missed, a thin, intermittent vocalization. Not quite a bleat and not quite a cry, something in between. Carried on the wind and nearly swallowed by the sound of the water moving over the rocks. He stopped walking, listened. There it was again, slightly to his left downstream, near a dense cluster of cedar and scrub oak that grew close to the water's edge. He left the fence line and moved toward the sound. The calf was lying on its side in the mud at the creek's edge, half in and half out of the shallow water. It was a newborn. Caleb could tell by the size, the damp look of the coat, the umbilicus still visible and recent. Angus, solid black except for a small patch of white on the chest. Its front left leg was caught in a tangle of old barbed wire that had broken off from a fence post years ago and been swept down by previous floods to collect in a low spot near the bank. The wire had wrapped twice around the leg just above the hoof, and the calf had been struggling. The mud around it was churned and dragged, which had only tightened the coil and driven the barbs deeper into the skin. The leg was bleeding. Not catastrophically, but steadily, the dark red mixing with the creek water and mud into something that looked worse than it probably was. The calf turned its head toward Caleb as he approached, the dark eyes wide and exhausted and frightened, the vocalization dropping to an almost inaudible murmur. Caleb crouched down and was still for a moment. He looked around. No cow nearby. The mother had either wandered off or been separated during the night. No other hands in sight. His radio was in the truck, a quarter-mile away. His phone had signal here, barely, one bar that came and went. He pulled off his jacket. "All right," he said quietly to no one in particular, or perhaps to the calf specifically. "Let's take a look." He had wire cutters and the repair kit back at the truck, but the calf was distressed and he wasn't going to leave it to walk back and return. He pulled his multi-tool from his belt. It had a wire cutter on it, smaller but adequate, and began working on the tangle carefully, talking in a low and even voice the entire time. Not words exactly, just sound, the kind of continuous quiet murmur that cattle respond to, that says, "I am not a threat. I am not fast. I am here and still." The wire was old and stiff, and had oxidized brown, difficult to manipulate with cold fingers. It took him nearly 20 minutes to work through the coil without pulling it against the wounds. He kept one hand on the calf's shoulder throughout, maintaining contact, feeling the animal shaking with cold and fear and exertion. When the wire finally came free, he set it aside and examined the leg. 3 lacerations, the deepest maybe an inch long, on the outer side of the cannon bone. None of them deep enough to threaten the tendon as far as he could tell, but they needed cleaning and they needed to stay clean, and the animal needed to be warm and dry. The creek water was cold, the calf was wet from the chest down. Caleb looked at his jacket on the ground beside him. It was his only work jacket, a Carhartt he'd owned for 3 years. The one with the torn right sleeve he'd sewn back with upholstery thread. He picked it up, shook the mud off the outside and wrapped it around the calf's body, tucking it under as best he could. Then he picked the calf up. It weighed somewhere around 60 pounds, he estimated. Light for a calf, but not nothing, especially carried in arms rather than over his shoulder because of the leg injury. He adjusted the animal against his chest, one arm under the hindquarters and one supporting the chest, the calf's head near his shoulder, and started walking back toward the truck. The ground between the creek and where he'd parked was rough, uneven, scattered with rocks, crossing 2 shallow drainage channels cut into the slope. He moved slowly, watching his footing, keeping his balance. The wind off the ridge was cutting through his flannel like it wasn't there. He could feel the cold working into his shoulders and arms. He talked to the calf the whole way. Not instructions, not anything that would make sense to anyone listening. Just a voice, steady and low, saying, "You're all right, we're moving, it's okay, I got you." It took him close to 40 minutes to cover the distance back to the truck. He laid the calf carefully on a moving blanket in the truck bed, tucked the sides of his jacket around it again, then got behind the wheel and turned the heat to maximum. He drove back to the barn. What Caleb Merritt did not know and would not know for another 9 days was that Thomas Whitfield had installed a network of 12 wireless trail cameras across the south and west sectors of the ranch 6 weeks earlier. following the theft of 2 ATVs and approximately $4,000 in equipment from an outbuilding. The cameras were motion-activated, capable of recording in color during daylight and in infrared at night, and they uploaded automatically to a cloud storage account that Thomas checked from his office in San Antonio, where he spent most of his time managing the ranch's finances and his other business interests. Camera number 7 was mounted on a cedar post 8 feet above the ground, aimed at the creek crossing at the south pasture. It had a field of view that covered approximately 60 feet in each direction along the bank. It had recorded everything. Dale Hutchins was at the barn entrance when Caleb pulled in. He looked at the calf in the truck bed, then at Caleb in his flannel with no jacket, then back at the calf. "Creek?" Dale said. "Wire tangle, South Bank, newborn, maybe 6 hours old." Dale climbed up and examined the leg without touching the jacket. "Whose jacket is that?" "Mine." Dale didn't say anything for a moment. "Then, get the med kit. We'll clean those cuts." They worked on the calf together for the next hour, cleaning the wounds with betadine, applying antibiotic ointment, wrapping the leg loosely with a clean bandage, getting the animal under a heat lamp in the sick pen with fresh hay and a bottle of colostrum. The calf was weak but responsive. By the time they finished, it was holding its head up and looking around. "Should make it," Dale said. Caleb nodded. He was shivering slightly. He hadn't mentioned that to Dale. "Go get a coffee," Dale said, which from Dale was roughly equivalent to a speech of concern. Caleb went and got a coffee. He didn't tell anyone the story. Not the Vega brothers, not the other 2 seasonal hands who were working the ranch that month, not anyone. It wasn't that he thought the act was notable, it was simply that in his experience, the things you did when no one was watching were the things that defined you privately, and the moment you told someone, they became something else, a performance, a credential. He didn't want that. He went home that evening at 6, showered the mud off in the trailer's narrow bathroom, and made grilled cheese sandwiches for himself and Lily, who was 8 years old and had very specific opinions about the ratio of cheese to bread and the correct level of crispiness for the outside. "Too brown," she said, examining her sandwich with the focused scrutiny of someone much older. "That's called character," Caleb said. "That's called burned." He conceded the point and made her a new one. She sat at the small table by the window and told him about school, a project about Texas wildlife, a disagreement with her friend Sophia about something that sounded complicated and important, a book she was reading about a girl who trained horses. Caleb listened and asked questions and ate his burned grilled cheese and thought that this specific moment, this ordinary evening, was the thing he worked every cold morning to maintain. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Outside the trailer window, the hill country dark came down fast and total, the stars coming out one by one over the pasture, and the calf in the sick pen survived its first night. Thomas Whitfield was 51 years old and had the posture of a man who had spent his life being taken seriously. He was tall, lean, in the way that suggested discipline rather than genetics, with gray beginning to show at his temples and a face that had been shaped by decades of outdoor work followed by decades of boardroom negotiations, weathered at the surface, controlled underneath. He wore his success with a kind of deliberate understatement: good boots, plain shirts, a truck that was new but not ostentatious. The kind of man who didn't need to announce himself because rooms tended to notice him anyway. He ran the ranch from a distance by preference and by necessity. His primary business was a commercial real estate holding company based in San Antonio, Whitfield Capital Group, which managed a portfolio of properties across South and Central Texas. The ranch had been in the family for 3 generations, and he maintained it with the same combination of efficiency and emotional distance that he applied to most things. He hired good people, paid them fairly, and expected results. He did not involve himself in the daily mechanics of cattle work. That was Dale Hutchins's domain. He checked the security cameras twice a week, usually on Tuesday and Friday evenings, reviewing flagged clips from the motion sensors with the same methodical attention he brought to financial statements. Most of what the cameras caught was unremarkable. Deer moving through at dusk, cattle clustering near the water, one of the hands smoking behind the tool shed. The ATVs had not been stolen again. The cameras had functioned as a deterrent, which was all he'd really needed. On the Friday of the second week of October, he opened the cloud storage folder on his laptop in his San Antonio home office, clicked through to Camera 7's recent files, and found a clip flagged from 6:38 in the morning, duration 44 minutes. He pressed play. The image quality was good. The sun had just cleared the ridge and there was adequate light. He watched a man he recognized as one of the ranch hands. He had to look at the employee roster to confirm the name: Caleb Merritt, general hand. Day rate. Walk into the frame, stop at the creek bank, and crouch down. Thomas leaned closer to the screen. He could see the calf in the mud. He watched Caleb assess the situation, remove his jacket, begin working on the wire with what looked like a multi-tool. He watched for 20 minutes without moving. He watched Caleb lift the calf. He watched him adjust his grip, find his balance, begin the walk back across the rough ground in the January wind without his jacket. He watched him stop twice to readjust his hold without putting the animal down. He watched him talk. Thomas could not hear what was being said, but he could see the movement of the jaw. Steady and continuous, all the way to the edge of the camera's range. When the clip ended, Thomas sat back in his chair. He stayed like that for a while. Then he rewound it to the beginning and watched it again. He didn't call Dale that night. He called him the next morning, Saturday at 7:15, which was earlier than he normally called. "The hand named Merritt," he said. "How long has he been with us?" "Little over 2 years," Dale said. There was the sound of wind on Dale's end, the creak of a gate. "Good worker. Quiet. Doesn't cause problems. Family?" A pause. "Has a daughter. 8 or 9, I think. Single. Lives in the Cimarron trailer on the south edge of the property, the one we keep for seasonal housing." Thomas knew the trailer. It was the oldest unit on the property, heated by a space heater, the kind of place you put someone temporarily and then forgot about. "How's he getting on financially?" Another pause, longer this time. Dale was not a man who liked questions he didn't understand the purpose of. "I don't get into my people's finances, Mr. Whitfield. That's not a criticism. I'm asking because I'm curious." "Day rate," Dale said. "Same as the others. Far as I can tell, he manages." Thomas thanked him and ended the call. He spent the rest of the morning reviewing what he knew and what he didn't. Caleb Merritt, 34, according to the employment file. No emergency contact listed. He'd left that field blank on the hiring paperwork. Address: the Cimarron trailer, Drover's Creek Ranch. Previous employment: 3 other ranches across Texas and 1 in New Mexico, all confirmed by reference checks that Dale had run before hiring. There was nothing unusual in the file, nothing that told him what he'd watched on that camera for 44 minutes. He closed the laptop and went to church, which he did every Saturday evening. A habit inherited from his mother that he'd maintained even after his faith had become something more complicated and private than it had been in youth. He sat in the third pew and thought about what it meant to do the right thing when you were certain no one was watching. He thought he used to know the answer to that. The clip left his cloud storage on Sunday afternoon. Thomas had forwarded it to his personal email, intending to file it. Instead, and he would not be entirely able to explain this decision afterward, he forwarded it to his nephew, Brandon Whitfield, who was 26 and ran the social media accounts for the ranch as part of a modest promotional effort to support the agritourism side. The message he wrote was brief. "Saw this from one of the security cameras. This is what we want people to know the ranch stands for." He did not tell Caleb, he did not ask permission. In his mind, in that moment, it was not a complicated decision. It was a piece of footage that reflected well on the ranch and on the young man in it. And sharing it seemed like a natural thing to do. Brandon posted it Monday morning. By Monday evening, it had been viewed 400,000 times. By Tuesday morning, 2 million. Caleb found out from Lily. He'd picked her up from school on Tuesday the way he always did, driving the 20-minute round trip in his personal truck, a 2011 Chevy Silverado with a dented rear quarter panel, and she got in with her backpack and her lunchbox and her current library book and said, before she'd even closed the door, "Dad, did you save a baby cow?" He looked at her. "What?" Sophia's mom showed Sophia a video of a man saving a baby cow on a ranch, and Sophia said she thought it looked like you and showed me, and it was definitely you. Caleb was still looking at her. "What video?" Lily had her phone out, a basic device he'd bought for emergency contact, not for social media, a rule she followed with imperfect consistency. She had the clip pulled up. She handed it to him. He watched it in the school pickup line with the truck in park and his hands not entirely steady on the phone. He'd known about the cameras in an abstract way. Dale had mentioned them when they were installed. A brief announcement about not going through certain buildings without logging it for liability reasons. It hadn't occurred to him to think about the south pasture. It hadn't occurred to him that there was anything to record. That's 4.6 million views, Lily said, reading from the screen. He handed her phone back without speaking. Is that a lot, she asked. Yeah, he said. That's a lot. He pulled out of the pickup line and drove home in silence, his jaw tight and his mind working through the implications in a way that had nothing to do with pride or pleasure. 4 million people had watched him do something private, something he'd done without thinking about anyone watching. And now it was out there, enormous and irretrievable, and he had no idea what that was going to mean. What it meant, in the first 24 hours, was that his phone began receiving calls from numbers he didn't recognize. He didn't answer any of them. He had one voicemail from a reporter at a San Antonio television station, and another from a woman who identified herself as a producer at a morning show based in Austin, and a third from someone who simply said they wanted to say thank you and didn't explain further. He deleted them all. On Wednesday morning, he arrived at the barn at his usual time, and Dale was waiting for him at the entrance, which was unusual enough that Caleb felt his shoulders tense before he'd said a word. Whitfield wants to talk to you, Dale said. When? Today. He's driving down from the city. Caleb nodded. Am I in trouble? Dale looked at him for a moment with something that might have been amusement if it hadn't been Dale. No, he said. I don't think that's what this is. All right, Caleb said. He went to work. Thomas Whitfield arrived at 3 in the afternoon in a silver F-350, clean and late model, parking outside the main barn with a precision that suggested familiarity with the space. He was wearing work clothes today, proper ones. Boots and jeans and a ranch jacket rather than the business clothes. Caleb had seen him in on the 3 previous occasions they'd been in the same space, which were brief and without direct conversation. Dale introduced them formally, which felt strange given that Caleb had worked the man's land for 2 years. Mr. Merritt, Thomas said, extending his hand. Sir, Caleb said, shaking it. They stood outside the barn in the afternoon light. The wind had eased for once, and the sky was that particular shade of pale blue that shows up in Texas in the weeks after the first real cold arrives. I owe you an apology, Thomas said. He said it directly, without preamble, which Caleb hadn't expected. I shared that footage without asking you. I didn't think through what that would mean for you personally. That was wrong, and I'm sorry for it. Caleb looked at him for a moment. Okay, he said. Is there anything you need? From the attention, from the calls, is there anything that's become a problem that I can help with? I'm not answering the calls, Caleb said. That's your right. A pause. Caleb looked at the ground and then back up. The calf doing all right? Something shifted in Thomas Whitfield's face, a loosening, very small around the eyes. Dale tells me it's doing well. Another week and it should be back with the herd. Good, Caleb said. They stood in the quiet for another moment. I'd like to have a longer conversation with you sometime soon, Thomas said. About your situation here, your living arrangements, and your compensation. I've been looking at some things and I think there's room for improvement. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. He was someone who had learned through enough experience to make the lessons stick, to be cautious about things that sounded like they were offered freely. I'm not looking for charity, he said. It's not charity, Thomas said. It's a correction, there's a difference. Caleb looked at him for another moment, reading the man's face the same way he read cattle, looking for signs, for tells, for the small signals that indicated what was actually underneath. What he found was not warmth exactly, but something that appeared to be honesty. All right, he said again, we can talk. Thomas nodded. He shook Caleb's hand again, said something brief to Dale, and drove back up the road toward the highway. Caleb watched the truck go. Marco Vega appeared at his shoulder. What was that about? Work stuff, Caleb said. Marco looked at him. You're terrible at being famous. I'm not famous, Caleb said, and went back to work. But he just didn't know yet what it was going to cost him. The internet moves in waves, and the wave that had picked up Caleb Merritt crested midweek and then began, as waves do, to pull things up from the bottom as it receded. By Thursday of that week, 5 days after the clip was first posted, the video had accumulated 11 million views across multiple platforms, had been picked up by national news aggregators, and had generated a cycle of commentary that ranged from genuine warmth to the inevitable snark of people who had decided the story was too clean to be trusted. Several accounts had begun posting the clip with captions emphasizing different elements: the sacrifice of the jacket, the distance walked, the tenderness of the voice Caleb had used with the calf that no one could hear but everyone could see. A freelance journalist named Karen Ostrowski, who worked primarily in human interest pieces for a regional Texas magazine, had put Caleb's name into a search engine. What she found had appeared in public records 6 years earlier, a plea agreement in Bayard County, a charge of aggravated assault reduced to simple assault, a sentence of probation and mandatory counseling, fully served. The incident had involved a man named Derek Holt, whom Caleb had struck outside a bar in San Antonio. Derek Holt, according to the police report Karen had pulled, had at the time been in a relationship with Caleb's then-girlfriend, a woman named Andrea Celine, who had called Caleb from a parking lot, claiming she was frightened. The responding officer's notes described the situation as domestic adjacent, but Caleb had not been treated as anything other than the aggressor in the charging documents. Karen Ostrowski did not publish a character assassination. She was a careful journalist. She published a nuanced piece, 2,000 words, titled "The Man Behind the Viral Calf Video, A More Complicated Story," which acknowledged the tenderness of what Caleb had done and then presented the assault record as context, with quotes from a legal expert about the frequency of charges in situations involving protective response and the disproportion of the record given what was described. It was a fair piece by the standards of journalism. It did not matter. Social media is not fair. By Friday morning, the article had been stripped of its nuance, and the assault record had taken on a life of its own. New captions appeared on reposts of the original video. Comment sections turned. The phrase "he has a history of violence" appeared in threads that had nothing to do with the original article. Caleb didn't follow any of it online. He didn't have social media accounts. But he found out about the article the way he found out about most things he didn't want to find out, from the behavior of the people around him. The Vega brothers were quieter than usual on Friday. Not hostile, just careful. The way people get when they know something and haven't decided whether to say it. His phone had 42 missed calls by Friday afternoon. A mix of the original media inquiries and now something different. Some numbers called repeatedly, some with voicemails that began with the words, "I saw what you really are." He sat in his truck in the parking area behind the barn and listened to 3 of them before he stopped. His hands were on his steering wheel, and he was looking at the middle distance past the windshield at the pasture where the late afternoon light was coming in flat and golden. He was not a man who cried easily or often. He had trained himself out of it at a young age, in environments where it was not safe. But there was a specific kind of grief that lived in the chest rather than the eyes, a heaviness that settled like pressure when you understood that the truth of who you were was not something you could simply present to the world and have accepted, because the world needed a story that was easier than truth. And once they'd decided which one they wanted, the truth had almost no chance of breaking through. He thought about Andrea Celine. He hadn't thought about her in over a year, which had taken considerable effort to achieve. She had been the great mistake of his life, or perhaps more accurately, she had been the lens through which all his other mistakes had been focused and magnified. He had loved her badly, too urgently, too without reserve, in the way that people love when they haven't yet learned to protect themselves. And Derek Holt had been the night that everything broke. The call from Andrea's phone. The panic in her voice, the parking lot outside the bar with the neon sign red against the wet asphalt, and Caleb's fist connecting with the side of Derek Holt's face before his brain had fully processed what his body had already decided to do. He had been wrong to do it. He knew that then, and he knew it now. It had been a reaction born of fear and helplessness and the primitive certainty that someone he loved was in danger, but it was still a choice. Still a strike delivered in anger, still something that left a man's nose broken and a record on Caleb's name that would never entirely go away. What the article didn't say, what the comments couldn't know, was that Andrea had not thanked him. She had gone back to Derek Holt within the month. Caleb had served his probation alone, had attended the counseling sessions alone, had rebuilt his life alone. Lily had been born 2 years later to a different woman, a woman named Rachel Cole, who had left when Lily was 4 months old and had not returned. He was raising his daughter alone. He was trying to be someone she could be proud of. And now the internet had decided who he was. He came home at 6 and found Lily at the table doing homework, but she looked up at him when he came in and her face told him she knew something was wrong. "Dad," she said, "some kids at school said things today." He sat down across from her. "What kind of things?" She looked at her notebook. "About you. About something that happened a long time ago." She paused. "Sophia's mom said you were dangerous." The word landed in the room between them. He breathed. "Do you want to ask me about it?" he said. She looked up at him. She had her mother's eyes, dark brown, wide set, with an unsettling directness that made it impossible to hide anything from her if she decided she was looking for it. Did you hurt someone? Yes, he said. A long time ago. I made a bad choice and I hurt someone and I went to court and I was punished for it and I worked very hard to be different after that. He paused. I'm not going to tell you it was completely wrong. I was scared for someone and I acted before I thought, but it was still wrong and I knew it was wrong. Lily was quiet for a long time. Are you still like that? She said. No, he said. I don't think so, but I work at it every day. Another silence. Then she said, Sophia's mom doesn't know you. He almost smiled. No, she doesn't. I do, Lily said, and went back to her homework. He sat at the table for a while without moving. Something loosened inside him by those 3 words in a way that he couldn't entirely account for. Thomas Whitfield saw the Karen Ostrovsky article on Friday morning, forwarded to him by Brandon, who was managing the notifications from the original post and was increasingly stressed about the comments. Thomas read it twice, slowly. Then he pulled up the original employee file again and read through it a second time, looking at the employment history, the reference check notes, the 2 years of daily reports he'd received from Dale. He thought about what he'd seen on the camera, the 20 minutes with the wire, the 40-minute walk in the cold, the voice steady and continuous all the way to the edge of the frame. He called his attorney, a woman named Patricia Cook, whom he'd worked with for 15 years, and asked her, as a hypothetical, about a 6-year-old assault conviction fully served. She told him what he already suspected, that a completed plea in probation was a matter of public record, but carried no ongoing legal consequence. Then he called Dale. Have you seen what's happening online? I don't do online, Dale said. Thomas explained it. A long pause. You want to know what I think? Yes, I think that boy has been handling his business clean for as long as I've known him, Dale said. I think whatever happened 6 years ago, it's 6 years ago. And I think if you're looking for a reason to let him go, you're looking in the wrong place. Thomas hadn't said anything about letting him go, but he understood why Dale had gone there. Not looking for a reason to let him go, Thomas said. I'm trying to figure out how to help. Another pause from Dale. That's a new direction, he said. Thomas laughed once, short and surprised. Yes, he said. I suppose it is. On Saturday morning, Thomas drove back to Drovers Creek Ranch. Not because there was ranch business that required his presence, but because he had decided that some things needed to be done in person. He found Caleb in the north pasture, replacing the damaged fence posts from the storm with no assistance and no complaint. The wind had come back and the temperature had dropped again. And Caleb was working in a new jacket, a plain green canvas barn coat, the kind you found at farm supply stores for $30. Driving steel posts with a manual driver, methodical and steady. Thomas walked out to him across the pasture. Caleb looked up and then went back to what he was doing, which Thomas respected. I want to tell you something, Thomas said when he reached him. Caleb set the post driver down and straightened up, waiting. What's happening online? The article and the rest of it? I'm responsible for that. I put the footage out there. I created the situation that created the scrutiny. He paused. I don't have the power to control what people say, but I have the power to say clearly what I think, and I want to say it to you first. Caleb was looking at him steadily. I think what you did in that creek bed was the truest thing I've seen on this property in years, Thomas said. And I think whatever you did 6 years ago is none of my business, except, insofar as I can tell from 2 years of working alongside you, that it isn't who you are now. And that's the only part that matters to me. A very long pause. Caleb looked at the fence post in the ground, then at the horizon, then back at Thomas. I appreciate that, he said. His voice was controlled and flat in the way that indicated it was carrying more than it was showing. I'd like to offer you the permanent ranch hand position, Thomas said. Senior hand, Dale's deputy. Salary, not day rate, benefits. And I want to move you and your daughter into the Creekside house. He named a number that was nearly double Caleb's current daily rate annualized. Caleb was quiet for a full 30 seconds. Why, he said. Because you've been doing that job for 2 years without the title or the pay, Thomas said. And because I've been running this ranch at a distance for too long and things have been slipping through that I should have caught sooner. Dale needs a real deputy and you're the only one out here who's earned it. That's not why, Caleb said. Thomas looked at him. No, not entirely. He paused. I think the video reminded me of something I used to understand better. About what it means to work hard and do it right and not need anyone to see it. Another pause. I think I needed to be reminded of that. Caleb picked up the post driver. He bounced it once in his hands, weighing it. I want to keep my trailer for the moment, he said. The Creekside house is too much too fast, but I'll take the job. Thomas almost said something about the trailer, but stopped himself. The man knew what he needed and didn't need someone making decisions for him. The job is yours, Thomas said. I'll have the paperwork ready Monday. They shook hands in the cold pasture, the wind moving the dry grass around their boots. And something shifted between them, not warmth yet, not friendship, but the beginning of a different kind of respect than the one that had existed before, the kind that goes in both directions. The offer from Thomas Whitfield did not make the rest of the world quieter. If anything, the announcement that Caleb had been promoted, which Brandon posted on the ranch's social media account with careful, measured language, created a second wave. Some of it was positive. People who had followed the original clip celebrated, posted their own comments, argued with the detractors. The calf video was reshared with new captions. Someone had named the calf, incorrectly attributing this to Caleb, and the name Lucky had taken on a life of its own. Media inquiries resumed. But Derek Holt, who was now 38 and living in Houston and working in commercial insurance, had found the Karen Ostrovsky article. And Derek Holt had decided, after 6 years of silence, that this was a moment. He gave an interview to a Houston television station. He had prepared for it, or been coached for it. His account of that night was organized and emotionally calibrated in a way that struck several viewers as rehearsed and struck others as entirely authentic. He described a confrontation that was more severe than the police report suggested, that had left him with lasting anxiety and trauma and a broken nose that had required surgery. He said the plea agreement had been inadequate. He said he was glad people were examining the real Caleb Merritt. The clip of Derek Holt's interview had 2 million views by the following morning. Caleb watched it on Dale's office computer. Dale had called him in before the workday started, which was how Caleb understood that something significant had happened overnight. He watched the 6-minute clip without expression, his arms crossed, leaning slightly forward. When it ended, he was quiet for a moment. He's not lying about everything, he said. Dale, who had been standing by the window, turned to look at him. The nose needed surgery. That's true. Caleb uncrossed his arms. The rest of it is, he's telling a version, but there's enough real in it that I can't call it a lie. What actually happened? Caleb had never told anyone the full story. He looked at Dale, at the lean, weathered face, the eyes that judged things carefully and without drama, and decided that this was one of the few people in his life who had earned the full version. He told it straight from the beginning. Andrea's phone call, what she'd said, what he'd believed when he pulled into that parking lot, the rain, the neon sign, Derek Holt, and the way he'd been standing. The thing in his posture that Caleb had read as threat before anything else had registered. The strike. The immediate, sickening clarity of having made the wrong choice even as the adrenaline was still running. She'd called me scared, he said. But she wasn't. Or she wasn't anymore. Maybe she had been and Holt had calmed down, I don't know. I came in at the wrong moment, read it wrong, and hit a man who wasn't in the act of hurting anyone when I got there. Dale said nothing for a while. So you were wrong, he said finally. Yes, but not malicious. No. But that doesn't fix his nose. Dale nodded. It was the kind of nod that said, I have placed this information where it belongs and I am done with the examining of it. What do you want to do about the interview, he said. Nothing, Caleb said. I'm not going to fight it publicly. I'm not going to give another interview. I made a mistake and I was held accountable for it, and I've lived as cleanly as I know how since then, and that's the whole story. He paused. I can't control what people believe. Dale looked at him for a long moment. No, he said. You can't. But Lily's going to hear about this, Caleb said, and that was the part of his voice where the control slipped, barely, just for a second. And I need to be the one who talks to her about it before she hears it somewhere else. Then go do that, Dale said. He picked Lily up from school at the regular time, but instead of going straight home, he drove to a place they both liked, a small pull-off on the county road, above the ranch where the land dropped away and you could see 20 miles in 3 directions. All of it ranch land and cedar and limestone outcroppings, and the thin silver line of the river in the distance. He parked and they sat in the truck with the engine idling for warmth. I need to tell you something, he said. Lily, who had clearly been anticipating this, said, "About the man on TV. You know about it." Sophia's mom texted in the school parent group. A pause. She put a lot of exclamation points. He told her. He told her the whole thing, adapted for the understanding of an 8-year-old without softening the essential facts. He had thought someone he cared about was in danger. He had made a very fast and very wrong decision. He had hurt someone. He had been punished. He told her that the man on TV was not lying about the nose or the surgery. He told her that he'd been wrong. Lily listened with her hands in her lap, looking out the windshield at the long view. "Do you still love that woman?" she asked. He blinked. He had not expected that question. "No," he said. "I haven't for a long time." "Did you love her when you did it?" "Yes," he said. She thought about that. "Is that why you did it? Because you loved her?" "Partly. And partly because I was scared. And partly because I was young and I didn't know how to stop and think before I acted." "All of those things together? Do you know how to stop and think now?" "I work at it," he said. "Most days." She was quiet for another minute. Then she said, Okay. I still know who you are." She looked at him with those dark eyes, direct and unflinching. "You're the person who carried a baby cow 2 miles in the cold without your jacket because it needed help. That's who you are now." He looked at her for a long time. "When did you get so smart?" he said. "I've always been this smart," she said. "You just don't always listen." He laughed. A real one, short and surprised and genuine, the kind that cleared something out of the chest. He reached over and put his arm around her and she leaned into his side, small and warm, looking out at the long Texas afternoon. Thomas Whitfield had seen the Houston interview before Dale had. He'd seen it at 11 at night in his office with a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. He watched it twice, the same way he'd watched the Creek video twice, with the same intensity and something of the same stillness. He called Patricia Cook, his attorney, at 7 the next morning. If someone wanted to respond publicly to something like this, not legally, just factually, what would that look like? Patricia told him. He thought about it for 2 days. Then he wrote something himself. Not a press release, not a legal statement, a personal post on his own social media account, which had previously been used only for ranch-related content and had a modest following. He wrote about what he'd seen on the camera in the creek bed. He wrote about the jacket on the cold ground. He wrote about the 2 years he'd watched Caleb work and what that watching had told him. He did not attack Derek Holt. He did not relitigate the 6-year-old incident. He said only, "I hired Caleb Merritt 2 years ago and I promoted him last week, and I would do both again today without hesitation. And if that tells you something about my judgment of character, I'll stand by it." He posted it on Wednesday morning and went to work. By that afternoon, it had 40,000 shares. The person who called Caleb on Thursday was not a journalist. He almost didn't answer. Unknown number, he'd been declining them for 2 weeks. But something made him pick up, some instinct he couldn't explain. Is this Caleb Merritt? A man's voice, older, with an accent Caleb couldn't immediately place. "Who's asking?" "My name is Everett Cole," the man said. "Rachel's father." Caleb went very still. Rachel Cole, Lily's mother, who had left when Lily was 4 months old, whose family Caleb had never met, never spoken to, never had contact with because Rachel had cut all of them off years before she'd met Caleb, and he had respected that silence. "What do you want?" Caleb said. "I saw the video," Everett Cole said. "And then I saw the other stuff. I've been thinking for a week about whether to call." A pause. "I have a granddaughter I've never met. She's 8 years old. Rachel doesn't. We don't talk to Rachel anymore, but she's mine. And you're raising her alone, and I've been thinking." His voice broke slightly and then recovered. "I'd like to know her, if that's something you'd consider." Caleb sat down on the tailgate of his truck in the barn parking area. He looked at the sky for a long time. "I'd need to think about it," he said. "Of course," Everett Cole said. "I understand. What part of the video made you call?" A pause. "The part where you put your jacket on the calf," Everett said. "My son-in-law, Rachel's husband, before she left us too, he would have done that. The same way." Without thinking, another pause. "You reminded me of someone I lost." Caleb didn't know what to say to that. He said, "I'll call you back." He sat on the tailgate for a long time after the call ended, the phone in his hand, looking at the number on the screen. He was not accustomed to things arriving in his life that seemed like gifts without catches. He was a man who had learned to wait for the catch, who had been burned enough times to approach generosity with suspicion. But there was something in the old man's voice, the way it broke and then recovered. The thing he'd said about losing someone that sat in Caleb's chest without the familiar weight of warning. He put the phone in his pocket and went back to work, but he saved the number. November came in quietly, the way it does in the hill country, the heat finally gone, the light going golden amber in the afternoons. The night's genuinely cold now, the stars very sharp and close on clear evenings. The pecan trees along the creek had gone yellow. The cattle had settled into their fall routine, calmer, eating steadily, putting on weight before winter. That had started everything was back with the herd. The wounds had healed cleanly, leaving 2 thin scars on the left cannon bone that would fade over time. Dale had noted it in the health log with his characteristic terseness, calf 114F. Leg lacerations resolved, returned to main herd, no further issues. Nobody had officially named it Lucky, but everyone on the ranch used the name, including Dale, who pretended not to. Caleb had moved into the creekside house. He'd resisted for 3 weeks, citing various practical reasons that were all true and none of them the real reason, which was that he was uncomfortable with things that felt like more than he deserved. It was Thomas who had finally said, without particular drama, "It's part of the job. The deputy foreman lives in the creekside house. You're the deputy foreman. Live in the house." It was the word earn that did it, which Thomas hadn't actually used, but which was implied so clearly that Caleb heard it anyway. The creekside house was a 4-room frame structure built in the 1970s. Updated twice since, sitting on a slight rise above the creek with a covered porch facing west, and a yard with 3 large live oaks. It was not large, but after 2 years in the trailer it felt enormous. Lily walked through every room 3 times on the first day. She stood in the kitchen and turned in a slow circle and said, "We have a dishwasher." "Yes," Caleb said. "I've never had a dishwasher, I know." She turned in another slow circle. "Dad," she said, and her voice had something in it he couldn't immediately name, a kind of careful wonder. The voice of someone who has learned to want things modestly and is confronting something larger than they'd prepared for. "Yeah," he said. "This is ours? As long as I'm working here." She walked to the window and looked out at the yard with the live oaks. "Can we get a dog?" He had not expected that immediate pivot. Eventually, he said. "How eventually?" "Spring," he said. She accepted this with serious deliberation, the way she accepted all major decisions, and immediately began naming hypothetical dogs. He stood in the kitchen of the house that was his now, listening to her, and felt something that took him a while to identify because he had so little practice with it. The simple, uncomplicated fact of things being all right. He called Everett Cole back on a Thursday evening in early November, sitting on the porch of the creekside house with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand. The conversation lasted 2 hours. He learned that Everett was 67, retired from 30 years with the county road department, widowed 3 years ago, living in a house in Kerrville, 40 minutes north. He had 2 other children, a son in Dallas, a daughter in New Mexico, and 5 grandchildren he saw regularly. He had not seen Rachel in 4 years. He did not want to discuss Rachel beyond what was necessary. What was necessary was this. He said that Rachel had been a complicated person with a history of choices that hurt everyone around her, including herself, and that he had long since stopped looking for reasons and started looking for what was left. What was left for him was a granddaughter he had never been allowed to meet. He had seen Lily's face in the background of a photo Caleb had posted, Caleb's one concession to social media. A single image posted to the ranch's account that showed the porch of the creekside house with Lily visible in the doorway, and had recognized Rachel's eyes. He said, "I'm not asking for anything complicated. I'm just asking for a chance." Caleb was quiet for a long time. He was a man who made decisions slowly and kept them firmly. This one was harder than most because it involved Lily in a way that made the stakes higher than anything that involved only himself. "I need to ask Lily," he said. "Of course," Everett said. "She's 8, but she understands things. I don't make decisions about her life without talking to her." A pause. "That tells me something," Everett said quietly. "She'll have questions," Caleb said. "A lot of them, and they'll be good ones." "I have a lot of time," Everett said. He told Lily the next evening at the kitchen table after dinner with the dishes stacked in the dishwasher that she was still visibly delighted by. He told her about Everett Cole, about his relationship to her mother, about what the man had asked. Lily was quiet for a long time. She was eating an apple, methodically, not looking at Caleb. "Why didn't he find us before?" she asked. He says he didn't know where we were. And your mother, it's complicated. She kept people away, including us. The word hit like a stone dropping into water. Yeah, he said, I think so. More quiet. The apple disappeared, one careful bite at a time. Does he seem good? She asked. He seems honest. He sounds like someone who's been through hard things and thought carefully about them. Like you? He smiled a little. A bit older. She put the apple core down. Want to talk to him on the phone first. Then maybe we could meet him somewhere. Not at our house. Somewhere with other people around. He looked at her. That's a really sensible approach. I know, she said. I thought about it all day at school. He laughed. Okay, I'll set it up. She picked up the apple core and took the last possible bite from it with the focus of someone determined not to waste anything. Dad, she said. Yeah, if he's good, maybe he could come for Christmas. He hadn't considered Christmas. He looked at the table, at the ordinary domestic surface of it, the dinner plates, the homework folder, the half-full glass of milk, and felt the scope of what was changing. Maybe, he said. Thomas Whitfield came to the ranch for a full week in the middle of November, the longest continuous time he'd spent on the property in 3 years. He said it was because the fall herd review required his attention. Dale said nothing to indicate whether he believed this. Caleb said nothing at all. But Thomas was on horseback by 8 in the morning every day, working the pastures with Caleb and Dale, learning things about his own land that he hadn't known. He asked questions that showed he'd been paying more attention over the years than he'd let on. He was clumsy on horseback in ways that he acknowledged without embarrassment and improved on visibly over the week. On Wednesday afternoon they were checking the south fence, the same line where everything had started, the repaired posts now solid in the ground, the barbed wire taut and clean. When Thomas stopped his horse at the creek bank and looked at the spot where the calf had been found, the mud had dried and hardened. The old wire tangle was gone. Caleb had cleared it the same week, pulling it out and disposing of it properly so it couldn't catch another animal. The creek ran clear and low in the November quiet, the water moving over the limestone shelf with a sound like something being patiently resolved. This is where it was? Thomas asked. Right there, Caleb said. In the shallows, against that root. Thomas looked at the spot for a long moment. His horse shifted beneath him, impatient, and he settled it with a small adjustment of his weight. Do you know what I was doing that morning? Thomas said. Caleb waited. I was in a meeting in San Antonio about a property acquisition in New Braunfels. Conference table, coffee in a ceramic mug, 4 lawyers in the room. He paused. While you were out here in 38-degree weather, carrying a 60-pound calf 2 miles in a flannel shirt, that's the job, Caleb said. No, Thomas said. The job is feeding the cattle and checking the fence line. What you did was something else. Caleb looked at the creek. It needed doing. That's the whole point, Thomas said. He turned his horse back toward the pasture. That's exactly the whole point. They rode back in the comfortable silence of men who have found, without fanfare or declaration, that they understand each other. The media attention faded the way all media attention fades, not with resolution but with replacement. The next story arriving to push the previous one sideways. By the end of November, Caleb Merritt was no longer a trending topic anywhere. The Karen Ostrovsky article was still findable by anyone who searched for it, and the Derek Holt interview still existed, and the original Creek video still accumulated occasional views from people encountering it for the first time. But the wave had passed. What remained was the life, which was, in its details, both changed and unchanged from what it had been in September. He still woke at 4:45. He still moved through the dark in the pre-dawn hour. Still read the cattle the way he'd always read them. Still drove the fence lines and checked the water levels and noted in his log the small signs of health and trouble that accumulated over any given day. The work was the same work. His hands were the same hands. But he lived in a house with 3 live oak trees in the yard. He had a salary and health insurance for the first time in 4 years. Dale treated him differently, not warmly, because Dale did not do warmth, but with a particular kind of professional respect that carried weight precisely because Dale did not distribute it casually. And on the second Saturday of December, Caleb drove 40 minutes north on Route 16 to a diner in Kerrville called Myrna's, a place he'd chosen because it was public and well lit and served good pie and was 40 minutes from home, which gave him and Lily a clean exit if they needed it. Everett Cole was already there when they arrived, He was sitting in a corner booth, a big man going soft with age, white-haired, with the deliberate stillness of someone who had told himself 50 times on the drive down not to arrive at this wrong. He was wearing a flannel shirt and clean jeans, and his hands were folded on the table in front of him the way hands fold when they are trying not to fidget. He looked up when the door opened. Lily walked in ahead of Caleb. She was wearing her good coat, the dark blue one, and her hair was in the 2 braids she always wore on days she wanted to feel prepared. She looked at Everett Cole across the diner with those dark, direct eyes. Everett looked at her. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Lily walked across the diner to the booth, slid in across from Everett, and said, "Hi, I'm Lily. I have a lot of questions." Everett Cole's face did something that Caleb was glad he was far enough away not to have to pretend he hadn't seen. He cleared his throat and unfolded his hands and said, "Good. I have a lot of time." Caleb sat down next to Lily and ordered coffee. The waitress brought menus. Outside the diner windows, the December afternoon was pale and cold, the mountains to the west catching the last flat light of the early sunset. The questions Lily asked were good ones. She had prepared them, it became clear. As carefully as she prepared her school projects, organized, sequential, with follow-up points that indicated she'd thought through the possible answers in advance. She asked about Everett's job, his family, where he lived, what he did with his time. She asked about his other grandchildren in a way that suggested she was assessing whether he was someone who already had enough and was merely collecting, or someone who genuinely had room. She asked what his wife had been like. That one surprised him. He answered it with a slowness that indicated he was choosing his words carefully, and what he said was true and specific and not performed. And Lily listened with her chin in her hand and nodded when he finished. Then she said, "Did she look like my mom?" A pause. A little, Everett said, around the eyes. Lily looked at the table. "I don't really remember my mom," she said. "I was too small." "I know," Everett said gently. "Sometimes I think I might if I try hard enough," she said, "but I think I'm maybe making it up." "That's okay," he said. "I can tell you things if you ever want to know." She looked up at him. "Maybe later," she said. "Not today." "Not today," he agreed. She picked up the menu and studied it with great seriousness. "Do you like pie?" "Deeply," he said. "Me too," she said. "The cherry is good here." "I've never been here before, but my dad researched it." "He did?" Everett looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at the menu. The reviews mentioned the pie. Everett smiled. Not a small smile, a real one, the kind that reached everything. "Then I suppose we should order some pie." They ordered pie. They stayed for 2 hours. Lily ate an entire slice of cherry and half of Caleb's apple and explained, at considerable length, the naming project she had undertaken for the hypothetical spring dog. Everett contributed 3 suggestions. 2 were rejected immediately. 1, a border collie mix named after the county road, was considered at length and placed on the list. When they got up to leave, Lily shook Everett's hand. He looked at the small hand in his large one with an expression that Caleb looked away from deliberately. "Same time next month?" Lily asked. Everett cleared his throat again. "Yes," he said. "Same time next month." Christmas came with the particular quality it takes on when a life has recently shifted. The familiar rhythms of the holiday moving through unfamiliar rooms. The decorations finding new places on new walls. Everything the same, and nothing exactly the same. Caleb had put up a small tree in the corner of the living room. Lily had decorated it with the ornaments they'd carried from place to place for 3 years, the ones that fit in a single shoebox, because that had always been the constraint. Whatever they could fit in a shoebox could come with them. There were 11 ornaments. They filled the small tree without filling it entirely, and the gaps between them were just gaps, not absences. Everett Cole came for dinner on the 23rd. He brought a pie from Myrna's Cherry specifically, and a wrapped gift for Lily that turned out to be a book about Texas wildlife with a handwritten note inside that said, "For the next naturalist in the family. Your grandmother would have liked you." Lily read the note 3 times and then carefully tucked it inside the front cover. She showed him her room. She showed him the view from the porch. She showed him, with considerable pride, the dishwasher. After dinner, after Lily had gone to bed, Caleb and Everett sat on the covered porch in the cold with mugs of coffee, looking out at the live oaks and the dark pasture beyond and the enormous sky. "You've done well by her," Everett said. "She's done well by herself," Caleb said. "I just tried not to get in the way." "That's harder than it sounds," Everett said. They sat in the quiet for a while. The creek was audible from here on, still nights, a low, continuous murmur, like something running patiently in the background of everything. Her mother left because she couldn't stay anywhere, Everett said, not looking at Caleb, looking at the dark. It wasn't about you or about Lily. I want you to know that we know that. Caleb was quiet. She was like that from the beginning, Everett said. We tried 100 different things. He stopped. I used to think it was something we'd done. Now I think some people carry something that doesn't have a cause. Does she know about Lily? Caleb asked. She knows she has a daughter, Everett said. What she does with that is up to her. He looked at his coffee. I stopped managing that a long time ago. Caleb nodded. He had made his own peace with Rachel Cole years ago, the way you make peace with something that has no resolution, not by understanding it or accepting it as right, but by putting it in a place where it stopped requiring his attention. Lily didn't need a story about her mother that was either heroic or villainous. She needed the truth, that her mother was a person who had not been able to stay for reasons that were complicated and not about Lily, and that she was loved thoroughly and entirely by the parent who had. Thank you for coming tonight, Caleb said. Thank you for calling back, Everett said. They finished their coffee in the good quiet of two people who have found an unexpected understanding. And inside the house, Lily slept under her quilts with the wildlife book on her nightstand and the note from her grandmother's husband tucked safely inside the cover. New Year's Eve was clear and cold and the ranch was quiet. The cattle settled in the pastures, the barns shut and warm. Caleb drove the south fence line one last time before the year ended, an old private habit. Going back years, the way some people sit with something quiet before a new chapter begins. He parked at the south gate and walked to the creek. The water was low and very clear in the winter light. He stood at the bank and looked at the place where the calf had been. Just a bank now, ordinary, the mud long since gone hard and dry. A cattle egret stood downstream on a flat rock, motionless, looking at the water. He stood there for a while, not thinking in words exactly, but in the way that some reckonings happen, a slow acknowledgement of what has passed and what has changed, and what has stayed the same underneath. What had stayed the same was this. He was still the same man who had crouched in the cold mud 6 weeks ago and begun cutting wire from a frightened calf's leg without any thought of whether anyone was watching. That man had not been created by the video or by Thomas Whitfield's promotion or by Everett Cole's phone call. He had been built over years of choices made in the ordinary dark, most of them unwatched, all of them accumulated. The video hadn't revealed something new. It had simply put a light on something that had always been there. He had made mistakes. He would likely make others. He was a man who worked at being better the way he worked at everything, steadily, without fanfare, day after day, because the alternative was to stop trying, and that was not a thing he was capable of. Lily was 8 years old and had her grandmother's eyes and her mother's. Directness and something that was entirely her own, a quality of attention, of seeing clearly and without flinching, that Caleb suspected she had come by on her own. Built in some private interior workshop out of the raw materials of her life. She would be fine. He believed that with a completeness that required no justification. The cattle egret on the rock lifted its wings once slowly and then settled again. Caleb turned up his collar against the wind and walked back to the truck. In the spring they got a dog. A border collie mix, 3 months old. Found at the Kendall County shelter by Lily on a Saturday morning, with the focused determination of someone who has been planning an acquisition for months. Black and white, with one ear that stood up and one that folded over, and the hyperactive intelligence of the breed running at full power from the moment they carried him out to the truck. Lily had decided on the name 3 months earlier. She wrote it in her notebook the night after the Kerrville dinner and hadn't changed it. She named him Lucky. Caleb had objected on the grounds that it was the name the internet had given the calf, and he didn't want to reference any of that. Lily had listened to this objection with the patience of someone who has already decided and is allowing the other party time to reach the same conclusion. Lucky is a good name for a dog, she said. It's too on the nose, he said. It's a dog name, she said. Dogs don't know about the internet. He had no real counter to this. Besides, she said, you did get lucky. You got all of this. She gestured at the house, the porch, the live oaks, the long view of the pasture in the early spring afternoon. He looked at what she was gesturing at. Yeah, he said. I suppose I did. The dog ran 3 full circles around the yard and then sat down in the grass and looked at them with an expression of maximum alertness, ears asymmetrical, tail going. Caleb sat down on the porch steps. Lily sat next to him. Lucky trotted over and put his head on Caleb's knee with the complete and immediate trust of something too young to know about caution. He put his hand on the dog's head. Somewhere in the south pasture, calf 114F, Lucky the original, the one who had started all of this, was moving through the spring grass with the herd, the scars on her left leg pale and faded, her stride even and clean. She did not remember the creek bank or the cold mud or the sound of a human voice talking steadily into the dark. But she was alive and walking, and that was the whole point, and it was enough. The afternoon light came in long across the hill country, gold and clean, the way it does in April when the winter is finally genuinely over. Caleb Merritt sat on the porch steps of his house with his daughter and his dog and looked at the sky over the pasture he knew by heart, and felt, without needing to say it, without needing anyone to witness it, that he was, in this moment, exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because the internet had decided he was a good man. Not because his employer had promoted him. Not because the world had looked at him and approved. But because he had shown up, quietly, in the cold, when no one was watching. And that had always been enough.